Hello, welcome back to Gardener's World. It's been a pretty miserable winter here at Longmeadow. It's been very wet. It's jolly chilly today, but there is a feeling of spring in the air and lots to do. And none more important right now than clearing back the grasses. These are deciduous grasses like this miscanthus that have done their stuff. They've done it all winter. Lovely golds and tawnies and ochre colours, but now they need cutting back to the ground so the new growth can come through. And when you've cut them back, you can either add it gradually to the compost heap because it's very high in carbon, or chop it up and leave it on the ground and it makes a perfectly good mulch. Of course, we've got lots more jobs to be getting on with at this time of year and lots to enjoy too. On today's programme, Adam visits an extraordinary Japanese garden that's undergone a major restoration to return it to its former glory.
Look at that.
This was another area that really needed a lot of work. When we got the garden, this was horizontally, and when we cleared it, there was just this massive jumble of rocks.
We meet a gardener whose regular trips to her local recycling centre have helped her create a garden full of secret spaces.
Lots of things here from the tip, table from the tip, flower pot from the tip. Recycling is not obsession, it is a lifestyle.
Frances discovers how a former council depot site in Liverpool has been transformed into a green oasis.
So you started with just bare concrete.
We thought, right, we need to work out a way that we can actually garden on concrete, and that's how all these beds started.
And I should be planting out some summer bulbs and sowing sweet peas. This is the long walk, and until a few weeks ago, it was a double line of clipped box cones, 32 of them in all, flanking a path which in summer had Alchemilla mollis spilling over it and running like a floral river down the middle, and then with acanthus. And the whole thing worked really well as a rather formal, symmetrical display between two very busy gardens, the cottage garden and the jewel garden. But box blight ravished it last summer and autumn. And the trouble with box topiary is the more you clip it, the more likely it is to suffer from blight. So the only solution is to leave it uncut, and then it doesn't look good at all. So we took them out, and we had all kinds of ideas of what to do with it, but we finally decided that we're going to make either a long, narrow lawn or a wide, grassy path, depending on how you look at it. And I had planned to begin that with you today, but it's much too wet. My advice would be to any of you who are planning to make a lawn yourself is don't rush into it. The time will come when it will dry out and the soil will warm up, but until then, the best thing you can do is stay off it. I think fruit picked fresh from the garden when it's perfectly ripe is one of the great luxuries of life. But you don't need lots of space to grow really good fruit. And about 12 years ago, I planted these step-over apples. And step-over plants are a brilliant way of growing fruit in a small space. Now, last year, I put in a path here to divide these veg beds. That's given me the opportunity to flank the paths with more stepovers. But this time, instead of putting in apples, I'm going to put in pears. Now, let's just be clear about what a stepover is. I've got a couple here. A stepover is made from a normal pear or apple tree with a shoot going up. And that shoot, which is called the leader, is bent down sideways, and the first branch is bent the other way. So you have a T shape. Now, the second thing that's really important with stepovers is that they are on a dwarf rootstock, this bit here. And the rootstock determines how the plant grows, whether it's a great big tree, whether it's a dwarf, whether it's a bush, whether it grows well in wet soil or dry soil. There are lots of different rootstocks that are adapted to different conditions. The top, the grafted bit, determines the fruit. Now, before you plant, it is important to make sure that the ground is prepared. And what that really means when you're planting an apple or a pear is that there's reasonable drainage. And the other thing is you need some sort of support at the end of the run. And most stepovers will reach up to about 10 foot. And something that you can stretch across to tie them down to. Now, I like using hazel, but bamboo or wire will do the job just as well. Now, it's worth stressing you do need two, either two apples or two pears that flower at the same time. So the pollinating bees can go from one plant to the other. I have here Concord and Doyen de Comis. Concord is self-pollinating, but it does much better with another one. And Doyen de Comis needs a pollinator. So always get two plants, either the same or from adjacent groups. When you're planting, it needs to be in the middle, but with all trees, what you need is not a deep hole, but a wide hole. So I'm just going to dig that much wider than the pot. Let's test that for height. Now, at this point, what you need to observe is that the graft must be at least 2 inches above the surface of the ground, and that's really important. So we'll take this out. Now you can see those roots are fine. So that can go there like that. And it's always better when you're planting a tree or a shrub to plant it on a slightly raised mound rather than a saucer. The roots will go down and find the moisture. But if they're sitting in a puddle, then you're going to have problems. It's important to firm it in. So with the heel of your foot, just press down as you go around. Take these off, like that, and take this out. Now, having got your structure, however you want to make it, these need to be trained down. All plants want to grow vertically much more than they want to grow horizontally. So to encourage growth, you want to leave some of it untied until it reaches the length that you want. This is not going to bear any fruit for a year or two. But at Stepover apples, they've been producing fruit for the last 10 years really well. They look good, and yet they fit into a small space. I love them. We're going to join Adam now as he visits the first of a series of gardens, all sharing the same theme, which is that they have all been lovingly restored.
This garden is said to be one of the best privately owned Japanese gardens in Europe. And over the last century, its custodians have come and gone.
The garden was developed at the turn of the century by porcelain dealer Herbert Good. His travels abroad left him so inspired that he created the Japanese garden that today is so important it's listed as a Grade 2 star.
Six years ago, Fraser and his husband Albiro instantly fell in love with the garden after leaving their former city lives behind.
When we arrived, it was like, wow, you know, it just sort of hits you as such a special place. So it was really just completely spontaneous. We went for it without really even knowing what was in the village or whether there was a pub or a shop nearby. Looking back at it, it's a bit shocking, really, you know, it's just, oh dear, what have we done? But
Were you two gardeners?
no.
We just knew that there was a connection between the garden and both of us.
But looking after an historic garden of this nature, with its traditional buildings, mature trees, giant lumps of rock, painted woodwork, manicured lawns and pathways, all comes with a costly price tag.
There seems to be a beautiful naivety. Does that make sense?
Naivety is probably the right way to sum it up.
Yeah.
It has been a long journey of discovery. The garden needed a lot of attention, and there is this custodianship thing.
Yeah.
It's really about preserving it for future generations.
One of the first jobs was to tackle a series of 3 interconnecting ponds that had virtually disappeared under years of debris and clogging silt.
There was no real filtration system that was working, the pumps were broken, all the cascades were leaking. So we had a team come in to drain the ponds and desilt them, and they took out 20 or 30 tons of silt. Yeah, what they found was amazing. The lining was just this gorgeous blue pebble lining, which changed in tone from the inside to the outside, and of course the fish absolutely loved it.
Discovering this stuff
Yeah.
just must have been incredible.
Yeah.
Herbert Good employed a master Japanese garden designer, along with a team of 40 gardeners, to create the existing landscape seen today. However, it all started as an entirely flat field. The land was sculpted from the earthworks. Boulders were meticulously placed into their new spiritual home.
Look at that.
So this is Fern Gully, as we call it. This was another area that really needed a lot of work. So when we got the garden, this was horizontally full of debris, ivy, bamboo grass, and you couldn't see really what was in there. When we cleared it, there was just this massive jumble of rocks.
So you had some help with this?
We did. From the Japanese Garden Society, Robert Ketchell came in with a team, and we had the digger in here and took all of the rocks out and then lined it. Rocks came back in and additional features were made to create what we have now.
All the shapes, the lines, the structure, all the design come together.
It's very hard to contemplate this as a field, isn't it? Somebody's come in, created this garden, the detail, the craft, but you guys have picked that up and you've brought the craft back to this garden, which is great. Alvira, you come from Colombia, you were brought up in a rainforest, you moved to a slightly more controlled Japanese garden, and you're an artist.
Yes.
How does that artist develop a relationship with this garden?
I just love my relationship with trees since I was a child. Working in the trees, understanding the Japanese method of approaching to a tree. For example, you can see that I use a rope to tie this branch that was up there. I wanted to come to the front and to this side to make a proportion, a balance more aesthetically. And I use this rock, I tied it with this rope, and little by little every year it's coming down to where about I want.
In a sense, these are becoming living sculpture for you, yeah?
That's how I see them.
Yeah.
Because I feel that I live in a big sculpture or in a painting, and the wiring of these branches are like my brushes.
When you're in your studio, you get to eventually finish something, yeah? Here, you're never gonna finish.
Never. This is going to be my studio forever.
Interesting that you two come at it from a completely different point of view, but both getting an awful lot out of the garden.
I prefer the more sort of physical engineering, the wooden structures, renovating the ponds, and that Alvira's much more into the plants and the trees and making sure they're taken care of.
With the planting you've got here, the year must be incredible, the seasons and the change.
At this time of year, the trees have just come out, everything's bright and green and the colours are popping. But then when it gets to autumn, the acers turn into this magical rainbow set of colours from reds, ochres, yellows, browns, and it's just fantastic. And then, of course, when it snows, it's just like a magical world.
This is a magical place. You feel as if you've been transported. And then I met Fraser and Albero, one with his real attention to detail and the other, that artistic flair. But they both display a real empathy for this garden. And you know it's in safe hands.
I find that particularly fascinating because I do appreciate just how tricky it is to authentically create a Japanese garden in this country, and clearly they're making a very good job of it. Now, it's time to start planning ahead for bulbs. Actually, at the point when the spring bulbs are at their best, I always use this table as a kind of display of all the spring bulbs we grow. And this is probably the peak moment when we've still got some of the irises going, the hyacinths, which, by the way, are rich with the sound of bees. The bees love them. We've got many different types of daffodil and also scillas and muscari all coming through, creating this glorious burst of colour after a long grey winter. But now is also the time to be thinking about planting summer bulbs. Now that covers quite a wide field, includes dahlias, and gladioli and lilies. And I love lilies, and that's what I'm going to plant now. This is a new one on me. It's called My Wedding. It's a double, so got lots of petals and has really good scent. And I think lilies without scent are not complete. All lilies like the same growing conditions, which is cool roots, sunny flowers, and a nice loose root run. Now what I've got here is a mixture of about 70% leaf mould and 30% garden compost. And I've found over the years for lilies that's absolutely ideal. Now, I'm growing them in a pot. Lily pots conventionally are wider at the top than the base. It's got a big drainage hole in the bottom, so I need a crock to keep the compost in as much as anything else. And by the way, when you're using crocks, the more curved they are, the more the water can get out, but at the same time keep the compost in. So put one of those in the bottom, a little bit of compost, and we'll plant these about 3-4 inches deep. So we'll fill the pot about halfway full. And just remember to put them the right way up, roots at the bottom, and a pot this size I'll fit 3 in, and like that. Cover them over. Put the label in. And then that can be watered and put to one side until the foliage has grown and we're starting to see the flowers appear. Then I will put them into position. Now, a criticism, and I think a fair one, that's levelled at Longmeadow is we don't have enough places just to sit and relax. But you certainly can't say that of Audrey Crutchfield's garden in Southampton.
1, 2, 3. My name is Audrey. I wanted, and I always say I wanted some really quiet spaces where I could just sit and reflect. 7. 10. We've now got 19 different secret seating areas. 16, 17, 18.
You said there's 19?
Yeah, it's behind you. If you're feeling low or overwhelmed with things, then it's just kind of a quiet space to just sit back and think of nothing but nature. I've tried to create lots of different rooms and to cut down on the work as I've got older, lots and lots of evergreens so that they are self-sufficient. I would say my very, very favourite part would be the jasmine and the roses. I bought the aces for my husband, Jonathan. He loves aces, and I've planted a number of aces, different varieties throughout the garden.
They're beautiful, their colour variations really excite me. The leaf shapes, I think that they are one of the most beautiful species and certainly one of the most wonderful things that we've got in our garden. Audrey is, she's an incessant car booter and tip visitor. And when she goes to the tip, she will usually come back laden with stuff.
In the local tip, they have a shop and you can purchase things at reasonable prices. Tip, 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 tip. Tip, tip. Recycling is not obsession, it is a lifestyle. I have been banned by my family because I bring the odd things back that they do not understand until I've actually used them, and then everybody wants me to look out for something. Lots of things here from the tip, table from the tip, flower pot from the tip. Recycled bird cage without a bird. Not quite sure what the plant is. I believe it's a sedum.
It's not a canary plant, is it?
No. No canary in there. This isn't from the tip. I am now in one of the 19 rooms at the side of my garden, and this is where I take my jasmine cuttings. What important to do is find one with the woody area and snip. Yep. Take off all these long ones and just cut just about there, and then I pop it into some compost and then I water that well. I learnt to do this by trial and error because I actually don't like just cutting things and throwing them away. All of this jasmine here is from a cutting, and there's lots of plants that you can actually do that with. So I would encourage anybody to try. These are my peaches and I'm really proud of these. Early on the year, the leaves can get a disease, what I call peach blight. What I actually do is I go around every single leaf that is showing that. I pick them off one by one, and I always discard them in a bucket because I don't want that disease to spread, and I wash my hands. I am very proud of my peaches, and they taste really juicy. Look at that. Wish you could taste it. Every single day, rain, shine, snow, I will be out here just getting a piece of that medicine, getting that healing. I go in the garden every day. Sometimes I'll wake up really early, get a cup of tea, and I will just be out here. So if it's 6 o'clock, it's 6 o'clock, especially in the summer. If it's 5 o'clock, it's 5 o'clock. Sometimes I could be down here at 11 o'clock at night. Got lots of agapanthus, which I love dearly. I always collect the seeds, which are green at the time. I take them into the greenhouse, lay them on tissues. I have to let them dry out first, which takes a couple of weeks in the greenhouse. I then pot them on, lay them on top of some wet compost, and then cover them up with a lid. I don't put soil on top of them, and it takes about 18 months before they germinate. I really do love my garden. It's an absolute pleasure to me, and it still brings joy and tears to my eyes.
Well, obviously, all those seating areas are fantastic, but when Audrey gets time to sit in them, I don't know, because she's out there from morning till night busy, and you can see that in the garden. Now, here in what we call the big greenhouse, all winter I've stored the citrus, and I made a decision last year that we were not going to heat this. I just felt it was too expensive, and most of that heat was going out through the glass, and also we're just contributing to the problem of climate change, and that just felt uncomfortably wrong. So they've been unheated and unprotected other than fleece. We fleece them when it's cold. And you can see the effect. They have been damaged, but none of them have died, and they will come through. And by the way, look at my peach. That is blossoming. Last year we had good peaches, so with any luck, we'll get the same this year. Now I'm preparing the bed over here to continue the succession of salad leaves, because all winter long, this has been full of lettuce, and I want to keep it going. So I sowed another batch in January, and some of these are now ready, and the rest will be planted out over the next week or two. Now this is rocket, and you can see it doesn't have the very serrated cut leaves that you get in perennial rocket, which is what you normally buy from a supermarket. This is the annual rocket, sometimes less hot, but delicious. Now, you know they're ready to plant out, not from what's happening above ground, but you need to take out a plug and just look at the roots. If I take that out like that, you can see that the roots are on the outside of the plug. It's holding together. And in my experience, when you're growing things in a plug, you've roughly got a 10-day window. Before that 10 days, they're not ready. After it, they get slightly root-bound or pot-bound. And timing makes all the difference in the world. So if you can just crack that 10-day window, then they grow out really well. And when they grow well, they take up the nutrients better, and they resist attack by slugs and snails better. So everything works a lot better. Now, I always use my hands because they're the best tools I've got. Pop it in there like that. And as for spacing, roughly 8 inches is about right. You don't want to go any closer, because with rocket, it's a cut and come again plant. So you want a nice big plant with big roots. Plant them too close together and they won't regrow. And these will be harvested until about Chelsea time, about the end of May, by which time they will be wanting to bolt because it'll be too hot for them. Rocket doesn't like heat. But the tomatoes will be ready to take their place. I'll plant out the rest of this tray, give them a really good soak. And it's important with rocket, what they like best is to be cool and moist. So don't let them dry out. And if it gets really hot, well, they may well run to seed. And if you do see flowers appear, just take them right off. Now, still to come on today's programme. Francis is in Liverpool, where a former concrete council depot has been transformed into something beautiful.
It's lovely here, what a nice spot.
Underneath here is just reinforced concrete, and it's unbelievable how it's been transformed.
And we visit a walled garden set in the spectacular landscape of the Peak District.
The garden sits on top of this hill, and it looks out over this huge landscape, and the wind and the weather comes rattling over those hills, and we're the next highest thing that it hits.
But first we're going to visit one of your gardens, and this one belongs to Francis de Rosier.
Welcome to my garden in Cambridgeshire. We live in a flood zone, had severe flooding over the winter period, with water standing under our house, which is on stilts, for over a month. One of the plants that survived so well from the flooding is the rose. I'm very proud of this one. It loved the water it got. This part of the garden is one that I particularly want to show you, and that's because it's on low level ground and it's the area that flooded the worst. And it is predominantly vinca, which is a terrible thug, but if you get the right plants with it, like the fuchsia and the Persicaria superbum, and even there's a martagon lily, they will come through and survive. Build things like this raised bed, which will sort of save the plants that perhaps wouldn't survive. If you flood, don't worry. The sun will come out. Nature is a miracle.
Well, experience has taught me that Francis is absolutely right. It's extraordinary how plants do survive quite severe flooding. The spring garden here has been underwater numerous times this winter without any damage at all. The damage is done by lack of oxygen, not by rotting or drowning the roots. And for worms, for example, they will come to the surface, move sideways, go somewhere where there is oxygen in the soil, and then move back when the flooding disappears. So flooding looks like a disaster. It does cause a lot of mess, and obviously in homes it's catastrophic, but in your garden there's really not too much damage. The cottage garden has undergone probably a bigger change than anywhere else in the garden for the last 20 years, because last autumn we took out the long, wide box hedges that were here and the espalier pears, which were so riddled with canker, they hadn't produced a pear for a number of years, and we thought, okay, let's go for a change. Over winter, we've made this square, this brick square in the middle. We also took out all the perennials and added in about 30 new roses. And actually the new roses are all chosen so that they will flower or reflower later into summer. So I want it to keep looking fantastic in May and June, which it will do, because it always has done, but go on looking fantastic for as long as possible, ideally well into October. So now it's time to put back the perennials. We've got hardy geraniums. This is one called Mrs. Kendall Clark, which is a lovely pearly blue, slightly grey geranium. Flowers May and June, quite robust. It'll grow fairly tall, and like all hardy geraniums, can be cut back hard after flowering and will regrow. So this is something that wants to go nearer the front. And I've got a couple of these, so I'll put another one in there. Now, this is a phlox. This will grow tall and flower later. So that will go where I put the stick at the back there and fill that gap. And what I do have here is a geum. Now this is a geum called Mai Tai, which has got a sort of peachy, pinky, apricot-y colour. And finally, this is a poppy, an oriental poppy, which is very well known, called Patty's Plum. And Patty's Plum, they can go from a lovely smoky sort of purple colour, whereas some are almost brown, and you never quite know which one you're going to get, but it's a really good plant. And Patty's Plum, I think, could go on this side, in the front there, take pride of place. Place them, move them around, think about whether you want dots of colour, whether you want drifts, whether you want big blocks, and then when you're happy, then you start planting, and now is the time to do it. The whole of March is the best time to plant, move, lift and divide perennials, because the soil is warming up, they're starting to grow, but they haven't grown so much that you're traumatizing them when you move them. And if you're going to buy perennials, my tip is to buy a number of smaller ones and plant in groups, and you'll find that they will establish much better than if you buy a big plant. The time to buy big plants is at the end of the year, and then you can divide those up yourself, keep them over winter, and plant those out in spring. But either way, now is the time to be working on your borders, reshaping them, redesigning them, recreating them to get exactly the effect you want later on in the summer. Now, last June, Francis went to visit a brownfield site, which shows that where there is a will, there is always a way to make a spectacular garden.
This is called the Stones Nature Reserve, and I'm on the outskirts of Liverpool city centre, but out here you feel a million miles away from the hustle and bustle of city life. This is a place where the community can reconnect with nature, and just look at this meadow. It's absolutely glorious. Of course, meadows change throughout the year, but right now this beautiful pink of the muskmallow with the blue of the viper's bugloss and a sea of oxeye daisies is just breathtakingly beautiful. Retired teacher Caroline Williams leads the team of local volunteers that look after this very special place. So Caroline, tell me how this project has come about.
It's got quite a long and checkered history, this piece of land, because it was council depot for quite a good few years, and then it got planning permission for a housing estate to be built on this part of the park, and as a community we came together to object to that, and the planning was quashed.
After winning their campaign, Caroline and members of the community decided to transform the site into a space where locals could connect with nature. But they took on more than they bargained for.
When we actually started looking at the site, we realised it's a 4.5 acre site, and everywhere that we tried was concrete.
So you started with just bare concrete?
Yes, it has been a lot of hard work, but we thought, right, we need to work out a way that we can actually garden on concrete, and that's how all these beds started.
That's incredible. So under our feet there's what, some rubble, some soil, and then just solid concrete?
No, there's no soil. Basically, we bought 100 tonne of Mersey grit, which is sand taken from the River Mersey, and that went on top of the concrete. Underneath that, just to make the meadow a little bit different, we bought a tonne of biochar with the idea that the biochar could carbon capture as well. We couldn't believe it when it actually came up. We were actually in awe of the meadow because it was such a beautiful thing, and it's got better each year.
Fantastic. So it's doing an awful lot of hard work.
Yes, it is, yeah.
It's really beautiful though. And then you can see some of those annuals through it as well. So you actually have quite a nice balance of things. And there are a few poppies going quite well in the sandy bits. They seem a bit small and sad. Yeah. And then in amongst everything else, they're really tall and proud.
I think towards that end of the meadow, there's less sand. And they don't seem to like that. When they germinate, they seem to sort of burn off.
But on the other hand, that creates a varied habitat, doesn't it?
Definitely.
If it's all just one mat of the same thing.
Yeah, some things grow better where the stone is, and other things grow better where the sand is.
Where the land here changes, it gives you a chance to really see the other species. So there's chamomile, there's poppy, there's plantain, all different things going on. And in that more open habitat, the insects will interact differently. They'll see the plants more easily so they can pollinate them. Lizards can come and bathe in the sun, and it just creates those changes and variations that are actually really important. So if you're creating something like this, creating intentional, different, varying habitats is really good for biodiversity. After the success of the wildflower meadow 3 years ago, the former concrete jungle began to evolve. Local garden designer Paul Harris volunteered his services to create new areas of interest.
There was no water on this site, so we thought we'd actually try and create a bog garden. It's essentially full of plants that really like the damp conditions.
So working without water is obviously a massive challenge, and you have to be pretty sustainable to be able to do it. But is sustainability an important part of what this is all about?
Yeah, it's a really big driver. Obviously, when we excavated it, we had all this material, and really where I was interested in is, well, OK, what can we do with that pile? What can we do with the stuff that we took out of the hole?
And what did you do with it?
Well, we created what's called Table Mountain. It's very stony, it's very sandy, so really free draining, not very moisture retentive, and so we looked at what plants would really thrive in those types of conditions. Really, the only thing that we generally buy and bring into the site are the plants themselves.
This mound bed gets extremely dry. It's just rubble with a thin layer of mulch on the top of it. So obviously it's in full sun now, it gets really, really baked, and the plants have to cope with that. But even in the very, very wet spells that we get, this will drain incredibly quickly. So all these plants have to cope with extreme drought, and yet they're doing really well. And the reason why is that they're all adapted to cope with exactly these conditions. So things like the echinops, you can see, have this silver coloration, as does the santolina, and that reflects the light and gives a bit of a defense against extreme drought. Other plants, like this other santolina, have really reduced foliage so they don't lose as much moisture. And really, if you have a space like this that's incredibly dry, then it's just a case of choosing plants that can cope. And they are, they're really thriving. Look at the size of the Achillea behind me, it's absolutely enormous. They love it here. Maintaining this plot is no mean feat, but there's no stopping this community. This latest addition to the nature reserve was planted up just a few weeks ago. It's lovely here, what a nice spot.
It's really nice, isn't it? It's such a transformation. Underneath here is just reinforced concrete, and it's unbelievable how it's been transformed. This was the worst place on the whole of the nature reserve, yeah. And basically it's hot, really hot in the summer, and in the winter it was like an ice rink because of the ridges from the reinforcing bars. So it was the thing that we hated the most, and it's the thing that's transformed the site the most as well.
Beautiful, what a big job.
Yeah,
I don't envy you that planting job. Yeah. What's next then? What are the plans for this site?
At the moment, we just have open days. Hopefully, when we finish what we feel is the complete project, public will be able to access it dawn till dusk, whenever they feel like it.
It's such a lovely gift.
Yes.
It's really easy to look around and take a space like this for granted, but actually what Caroline and her volunteers have achieved here is enormous. It's such a lot of work has gone into this. And to turn a concrete jungle, an old depot with nothing in it, into a green, biodiverse, and rich and beautiful space is so incredible. Now this is a real hub for insects and for wildlife, and crucially, for people.
Well, there you have a location that is about as different from here as possible. And it just shows you, if you get the right plant in the right place, it will look good. Now, a plant that normally grows really well here at Longmeadow are sweet peas. Sweet peas love cool, damp conditions with rich soil. And it's not too late to sow them. These are ones that I sowed in January, and you can see they've germinated well and they've grown, but they're a bit etiolated. In January and February, there isn't much light, and so they tend to grow rather long and thin. But you can just pinch off the top with your fingers, and that will encourage side shoots, and you'll get a much bushier plant. Now, if I sow some now, they'll be ready to plant out in May, and that will spread the flowering season. Now, I've got 4 varieties here: Black Knight, Windsor, Midnight, and Almost Black. And you can see there is a theme there because I want all these to be in the jewel garden. I want their rich, dark colours. Almost Black actually is a variety I've never grown before, but I was caught by the name. And there's no need to soak them. There's no need to nick them with a knife. I've never had any trouble germinating sweet peas, just simply by sowing them, giving them some water, and they will come up. Now, I like to sow them in pots. They've got a long tap root and they don't like being disturbed. So whatever you sow them in, they're going to stay in until you plant them out. And I put 3 to a pot. And if all 3 germinate, I plant them as a group of 3. And this is a normal peat-free potting compost. I'm just covering them lightly. There we go, and I will label them. These then I will water, put them somewhere warm. They don't need extra heat to germinate, but if you have got a windowsill or a greenhouse or a heated mat, then they will germinate quicker. And then when they've germinated, they can harden off, and don't plant them out until the soil is warm. But in case of sowing them now, that's going to happen because it's going to be May. And they will start flowering mid-June and go on flowering, everything being equal, which it never is, into September. We're going now to visit a garden near Sheffield in the Peak District. And it's an interesting setup because the owner doesn't have time to look after or create the garden at all. But this has given Owen Heyman the chance to create the garden of his dreams in a fantastic setting.
The garden has an amazing backdrop, big landscape of the Dark Peak Pennines. And then in the foreground you've got the planting here in the garden within these walls. There isn't much mid-ground, so the garden almost floats in space. There's kind of the garden and then far away, but there's not much in between. I really like that. So I don't own this garden. I was waiting for an allotment, and when the people who own this land moved in about 7 years ago, they knew that they didn't have time to deal with it, so they contacted the local allotment association, and through that they found me. I propagate a lot of my own plants and then I bulk them up, so I do have stock bed areas. For example, I've got an area where I've grown about 50 different Amsonia from seed, so I can look at them, observe them, look at the difference in leaf shape, look at the difference in size. I've got lots of different plants here that I've kind of just want to plant them and just watch them and see what they do. The style of perennial planting that you see a lot of here is something that's been in vogue for about 20 years. And the reason that those plants have been popular is because they're kind of well-behaved plants, they're quite low maintenance, they hold their structure through the winter, so they have a long season of interest. But actually, there's a lot of plants that we can start to bring into the loop with that. You know, out in nature, you'd find little shrubs growing with ferns, growing with some kind of bramble, with some kind of grass. So it's just trying to take a little bit of inspiration from nature. So we're down on the lowest terrace of the garden, of the 3 terraces, and this bit has a kind of shady side over here and a more sun-baked side against the wall on this side, where the soil is thinner, where they dug the terrace into the hillside. The grasses are something that I really like in this area. We've got the purple moorgrass over there, the very tall one. This is Molinia windsowl. And then I've got Miscanthus transmorrisonensis. I've tried a lot of different Miscanthus, and that's one that really works for me. It seems to tolerate with our kind of slightly cold, windy conditions, and it flowers reliably, holds itself up nicely. And then here we've got Spirobolus heterolepis, which is the prairie dropseed, and it has these lovely kind of heavy seed heads that look like water droplets. And then in winter and autumn, it kind of turns this lovely russet orange colour foliage, and it's like a haze, a misty haze, and it really needs to be planted in numbers. I've got 4 there together, but I'm going to try and propagate those and create larger areas to create a better effect. The garden sits on top of this hill, and it looks out over this huge landscape over to the Dark Peak on the Pennines. And the wind and the weather comes rattling over those hills, and we're the next highest thing that it hits. So we get these really strong westerly winds, and when we get wind and rain, you can see it coming over, and then it hits us. And the wind rises up this slope and it hits this huge stone wall, and then it rattles over and spins over into the garden. So we're kind of in this whirlpool, and it's just why the place is so dramatic, and I love it. I like to have a few areas in the garden of really big, long season, boom flower power. And here is an east-facing wall, so it's protected from the westerly winds. That means it's a perfect place for my more tender plants, so things like dahlias and salvias. And then it's good for my annuals as well. This is a juniper that I've grown from a cutting. With woody plants in particular, I find that they do best if they're planted in aquatic pond pots. And the benefit is that when the roots reach the edge, they get pruned by the air. So you get lots of fine, fibrous root growth. And that means that when you plant them into the ground, they're not circling, they're pruned, pointing outwards, and they're ready to grow outwards into the soil. And I find that my woody plants are much more successful and healthy compared to a normal pot. I grow cacti and succulents and agave because they are so completely contrasting to most herbaceous plants. They have shapes and forms and textures that you don't find in any other plants, and I think that they just bring a completely different dimension to the garden. Some of them are really hardy, like sempervivums, and they can be outside all year round. And then I have things like opuntias, which are the prickly pear cactus, and agaves, and these are really hardy, but they need to be dry in winter, so they stay in pots and they go in the glass house over winter where they're nice and dry. I don't have much more of a name other than to create a beautiful garden. Plants do that amazing thing of you plant them and then they take on a life of their own. You know, I might have started them through a seed or a cutting, but then what they will do in the garden, I can only watch and observe and nurture it. That's when the excitement starts. So, you know, it's a little bit like doing a painting that really takes on a life of its own. It's just a complete joy, generally.
Well, apart from the fact that Owen has made a beautiful garden in an extraordinary place, there was one little detail I liked, which was that he was using his east-facing wall to protect plants. Now, here at Longmeadow, that's the coldest aspect, and I would never put tender plants there, put them against the west wall, but for him, that wouldn't work because of the wind. The point being is every garden is different, and it really matters to know your garden. It's always a personal thing, and the better you know it, then the better you can employ it to get the best from your plants. Now, talk about best from your plants, how about this? This is double Ellen White, and year after year it performs beautifully. But we have lots of hellebores here at Longmeadow, and I do love them. They have that wonderful combination of being statuesque, of having heft, but at the same time having delicacy. And for me, they are the supreme perennial plant in spring. One of the jobs that is good to get done in March, after the snowdrops have completely finished flowering, is to take stock of where they are and how you want to spread the groups. Now, snowdrops spread by seed, and if you leave them alone, in time, as we know, they form these fantastic sheets of white. But it does take quite a long time, and you can speed up the process hugely by lifting clumps and dividing them. And it's simple enough. If you've got a clump like this, which is a bit too close under the hedge there, just get down in under it, trying to take as much as you can. So we'll lever that out. There we go. That's coming out. Right. We have a clump there. So I'm going to break that up. Just tease those apart. So planting a clump like that, which is probably about 20 plants, that will quickly establish. So we've got a bit of a gap there, and all I have to do is take out some soil, pop that in, put push it around it, and that will fill the gap and then in time spread. And it's very simple, and also it's a brilliant way of giving them to somebody. All the snowdrops in this garden come from one little bundle about the size of one of these, given to us by a friend in 1993 from her own garden. So each one of them is a memory of friendship, and that's one of the magical things about gardening. Now, I've got a job to do, spreading these, and here are some jobs for you this weekend. It's time to cut back autumn fruiting raspberries, and these are the ones that produce their fruit from August through till October. Take off all last year's growth right back down to the ground, because this will let light and air in for the new shoots to appear, and it's on these new shoots that this year's fruit develop. And then the canes can be taken to be shredded and added to the compost heap. Although for most of us the soil is too cold for planting potatoes, now is the time to buy seed potatoes and chit them. Take them out of their bag and place them on a seed tray or an egg box, and then put this in a frost-free, bright place like a windowsill. They will develop knobbly, dark shoots, and then when you do plant them, when the soil warms up, this will encourage them to grow quicker, and therefore you can harvest them sooner. Now is the ideal time to prune buddleia. They flower on new growth, so cut them back hard, leaving one or two vigorous buds. This will stimulate regrowth that will carry strong flowers from midsummer onwards. One of my favourite vegetables of all is this, broccoli. Now, bear with me, because I'm not talking about the great green cauliflower like Calabrese, which is often sold as broccoli. This is purple sprouting broccoli, and it's very different. For one, it's best picked when it's very small. I mean, this, for example, is perfect. It should just snap off like that. That is ideal. A tiny little floret with a few leaves and a stem. You can eat it just with salt and pepper and maybe a little bit of butter or a drizzle of oil, and it's a treat. You sow this in April, plant them out in June, and then they take up the space right up until they're ready to harvest, which at the earliest is late February. So for nearly a whole year, you're waiting for that one seasonal harvest of a few weeks, but trust me, it's worth it. Well, that's it for this week. It's been lovely to be back. And I'll see you again next Friday at 8 o'clock here at Longmeadow. So until then, bye-bye.